Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode 26, and today we're going to talk about the differences between aggro, midrange, and control, and not difference based on what we think about a deck, but differences on how we can possibly quantify it. So the plan of the seminar today is, first of all, we're going to start, instead of my normal preamble, we're going to talk about the winner of the ALSA competition and the cards that improved the most in the eyes of the arena users over the first 2 weeks of the format. Then I'm going to look at the impact of cards on length of the games. And we're going to do some exploring of the speed data. So basically, how long does a game take? Especially impact of the delta game length on win rate. And delta game length is, as I defined it here, will be the difference between the length of the games that you won while playing a card or while drawing a card, and the length of the games that the user lost. Then we're going to look a bit about the archetypes that promote aggro, mid-range, and control. This is a very experimental part, so it's a very open analysis, and I just probably scratched the surface of it, but I think while scratching the surface, I came to some interesting, at least to me, observations. So that would be very much worth exploring it further. Like, this seminar series is partially informative, partially trying to expand the boundaries of what we can do with the numbers in relation to limited games. And this episode is definitely going to be more on the exploring of the boundaries than on telling you what things are and which card has a higher win rate. It's going to be more a very unknown area of the data analysis related to Magic the Gathering. And at the end, as I promised, I'm going to talk about some cards individually and look at some individual numbers related to them. I'm going to talk about the Kamigawa's worst kept secret and give you some numbers about that secret. But without further ado, we can start. Before the format was released, I set up my traditional Kamigawa prediction game. And the question was, which common will improve the most in ALSA, average last seen as metric, from 17 Lens? Again, all the data that I have here is from 17lens.com. Please support them. Please use them. Please analyze them yourself because it's fun. So the idea was that people that follow me on Twitter, or people that don't follow me on Twitter but just happened upon this thread, could pick a common from Kamigawa and comment the name of it under the tweet. And I promised that I will calculate the ALSA for the picked cards for first 4 days of the format and for the first 4 days after 2 weeks of the format have passed. And then the person who picked the most improved card wins the game. And maybe an arena code. I do have an arena code. It just depends whether they are eligible to redeem it, and it will land in the winner's pocket. Okay, so here comes. This is the winner. Imperial Oath. How surprising. It improved its ALSA by 1.72, which is quite a lot. It's basically almost, it's picked by almost 2 picks higher than it was in the beginning of the format. And it's pretty decisive winner, because the second place Fade into Antiquity, which also many people mentioned, improved by 1.56. And it looks like a comfortable win, but actually I made a small mistake in the beginning, and I took different reference period. And when I took a different reference period, just by 1 day, actually Fade into Antiquity won. So yeah, basically, depending on the frame of reference I picked, Fade into Antiquity people could have been winners. Jason ILTG says that he won, and it's sort of true. First of all, Jason, congratulations, you already won, because you were mentioned on the limited resources as the person that knew that Oath is going to be great, and LSV sang praises of you. So if you didn't catch it, I would recommend it, because you were basically promoted to a household name now, because LSV. Oh, Marshall asked a rhetorical question: "Who could have predicted that Oath is going to be so good?" And LSV said, "Jason." And Marshall said, "Oh, which Jason? Yeah, Jason, Jason ILTG. Okay." So yeah, in that aspect, you're definitely a winner. But let's look at the other cards that improved. So Fade into Antiquity is second, Geothermal Kami is third, Season of Renewal is fourth, and they are very close to each other. The Fade into Antiquity, Geothermal Kami, and Season of Renewal. Then quite close Okiba Reckoner rate. I think that this card suffered a bit from being already decently high from the beginning. And then we have a bunch of cards that are significantly lower than that. So as Season of Renewal was 146, Okiba Reckoner rate 134. Then we have a bunch of cards that are at around 110, 111, and that's Fang of Shigeki, Virus Beetle, and Commune with Spirits. And the last two in the top 10 are Tales of Master Seshiro and The Modern Age. And I think that obviously Imperial Oath is a goat. I mean, the card is great. It's the top win rate common in the format as well. On top of being the biggest advancer, and actually it has, in my opinion, still space to improve because it could be taken more highly by people because it fits into every deck. Basically, it's a colorless card, and you would expect colorless cards to be picked slightly higher. I think that the interesting cards in this collection is the Modern Age, because I think that this card did not improve by as much as it possibly should. I think it's more valued by more invested players, and the ones that are less invested still maybe didn't catch completely on the Modern Age. And Virus Beetle is another card that probably improved by quite a lot, but was already highly estimated because people for some reason love the 1/1 discard a card creature. So it didn't have that much space to improve. But the Virus Beetle is another, well, sort of goat. But it's not the only thing that we can draw from that comparison. Why is it important? First of all, maybe I should mention. Um, if you watched my episode on the evolution of the format, first 2 weeks is the time when the format is sort of maturing in terms of at least picks. And after the 2 weeks, there is very little change in terms of how people pick cards. So if you know which cards changed the most, you probably should reevaluate those cards the most as compared to the first week of the format, because they will be less available, which means that decks that rely on having them are going to be less available by corollary. So the idea is that from week 2, and that's give or take, of course, because there is no like deadline. It's like, oh nope, pick orders are fixed now, nothing can change anymore. But roughly they're not going to change by a lot in case of most cards. So now is the time to not figure out how to abuse the system because good cards were open. Now it's the time to start abusing the system because we know that the pick orders are going to be more or less fixed. So you can find solutions to the format that is already there, rather than focusing on cards that are underpicked because people still didn't learn their power. So now is the time to figure out, okay, well, we're not going to get 3 Imperial Oaths in every deck, so we have to skip that plan. But what is the open plan? Let's look at all the cards and figure out which ones are open, which ones are not, and then figure out which deck is going to be quite easy to draft and quite powerful. And for example, I know that their last episode of Draft Club with the Jordan is focusing on mono red as a potential deck that can be quite open now and quite powerful if you know how to play it and how to draft it. So I would highly recommend you to listen to Draft Lab. Not now, finish this one, but after you're done with it, then you can go to Draft Lab and listen to the episode. It was great. Right. Apart from the commons, there's also uncommons, as we know, and there are several of them that increased in evaluation by people. The winner is Gloom Shrieker, which increased by a whole 1.12 picks. So it would have made top 10 in the commons list as well with that result. So that's worth noting. Whole 1 pick difference for Boseiju reaches Skyward. The card is a house, and people quickly understood it. You have to keep in mind that it's much harder to progress for uncommons because they were usually already picked quite highly. So the fact that they improve means a lot. Then number 3, we have Spinning Wheel Kick. This card has been very underplayed before the format was launched. Lots of people said that the card is not going to be good. I didn't say it, but I thought it. I can confess in shame that I thought, probably that's too easy to blow out. But it turned out that the format is not so focused on removal, so you can actually play it quite reliably as a 2-for-1, 3-for-1 in the late game, and there are lots of decks that can utilize it very well, and people also figure that one out. Then we have like a bunch of just monstrous cards, like Kappa Tech Wrecker is almost a pick higher picked than in the beginning. Colossal Sky Turtle, Life of Toshiro Mizawa, The Long Reach of Night, Blossom Prancer. These are all like great cards that increased in value. There are 2 cards that sort of surprised me. One is Containment Construct, the 2/1 that whenever you discard a card, you can play it until end of turn. This increased in evaluation of people. I don't know if 100% rightfully. I do like the card, but I think that it needs a particular home. So I don't like it being picked much higher, because that means that that particular home will not be available that frequently. And the other one is Onicult Anvil, and I'm surprised that it improved, because I was expecting that these cards, people are going to be high on it from the beginning, but it turns out they weren't, and there was space for improvement, and indeed it did improve, because that's like the driving force behind the aggressive red-black decks. So yeah. There were also cards that definitely dropped in evaluation, and here I didn't look at the rarities, but definitely, if we see at the losers, most of the time it's going to be cards at higher rarity, because they were probably initially picked quite highly, and people just weaned off of them. So the biggest loser is Essence Capture. I think the card is just not aligning very well with this format, and people remember that it was a really, really strong uncommon in previous formats it was in. But now, because the main thing that you want to counter are sagas, and it doesn't counter the sagas, and it's super annoying when you keep up 2 mana, you don't have that much to do at instant speed anyway, and then someone plays saga, and you just like stay with this 2 mana open like an idiot. So people figured it out that it's not so great. I think Mirror Box is the second biggest drop, but I think it was a meme rare from the beginning, and the same with March of the Burdening Life, which is the green March. These cards are just not good in limited, and people tried them maybe in the beginning, and now they don't want to try them anymore, because they tried and they figured out that they don't do what they're supposed to do. The biggest dropped common is Dragonfly Suit. Bad numbers for this card. It just doesn't do what it was supposed to do. Turns out that the 3/2 flyer, even though flyers are pretty good, is just not what you want, because it blocks badly. It requires you to crew it with a one power creature, which is not super optimal. So that's biggest common in terms of evaluation, in terms of losers. Then we have the Ishin to Heavens is one, another meme rare that people tried to build. Red Invoke, which is just not good in limited, especially in this limited when there's not so many instants and sorceries. There is March of Reckless Joy. That's the red March, also not a great card in limited. I think that it's played and constructed in some kind of weird modern combo decks where it works. Mech Hanger and Mobilizer Mech, these are also big losers. And Eiganjo Uprising, this weird samurai generator that maybe would have been good if red-white was ultra aggressive, but it's not ultra aggressive, and therefore it's not a good finisher, I guess. So these are the biggest losers, and they are all between 1 pick to 0.8 picks in terms of how lower they are being taken. So good news for rare drafters. Some rares are going to be available if you want to draft them. Should be no problem. So now the biggest winners. The biggest winners are the 5 people that wrote Imperial Oath in the comments. And I know that Jason is the honorary winner, because he was trumpeting the oath for ages, but I decided to go for the chronological order of people who wrote oath under my tweet. And the first one was Alessandro Ballini. who was the first by a whole 40 minutes in terms of writing Imperial Oath. And then second was Chris Fearjohn. I hope that I pronounced the surname correctly, who was a whole 6 minutes ahead of Jason, who was the third person to write Imperial Oath. And then we still have Ryan Kerr, who was probably half an hour behind Jason, and M. Mertes FP, who was well, good 8 hours too late to the party. But these are the five people that are the biggest winners of the ALSA competitions, and I will contact them in the chronological order if they can still redeem the code that I have as the prize. But all of them should be proud of themselves because they did predict the right card. But actually, I have to say, lots of the predictions were of the cards in top 10. And as I said in the pre-show, no, during the show, different reference frame and the winners might have been completely different because well, Jason, Zach says, during previous season, who would have thought a 6-drop common would be good? Jason would have, and he did, and he was right. Hot takes are good because sometimes you're right and then you're the hot take master of the world. I think that this one was a very excellent case of logical thinking and imagining what a card will do based on pure theory crafting. So kudos to Jason for being the Imperial Oath champion. Now we can all also NCAA. That's true. We can't take it from NCAA. He was also quite high on the oath from the beginning. And well, great job because it's not easy to theory craft. Predictions are difficult, especially when it comes to the future. So kudos to everyone that predicted it. And now we can pick oaths very early so that they cannot play them and make their life miserable in that way, just to, be sore losers or something. And with that announcement, we can go on to the main topic today, which is aggro, mid-range, and control in limited, and how can we recognize it from the data, or how can we try to recognize it using the data. So to start with some theory, let's make some broad definitions of what aggro, control, and mid-range is. So first of all, aggros has the plan of winning as early as possible. Usually aggro doesn't play very well into the late game and runs out of steam, so it wants to focus on cards that will let it win very quickly. Control, I would broadly define as a deck that tries to prolong the game and win with value, either by attritioning the opponent and winning with small threats, or by protecting yourself until you can drop one of the very powerful bomby kind of drops that your deck depends on. So there are several ways of playing control in limited, and I think that these are the most common ones. And then there's the mid-range, and I know that there is the saying that all limited decks are different versions of mid-range, but if they are all different versions of mid-range, then we should still define some of them as aggro, some of them as control, and some of them as mid-range within the mid-range spectrum. But mid-range decks will have access to both strategies, and if constructed well, they should be able to be apply those strategies per need. So if an opponent has a slow start, you can go aggro. If an opponent has fast start, you will be able to hopefully control the board, stabilize, and take over and win. So with those definitions out of the way, how to tackle that with data? And the idea that I was flirting with for already a long time is that maybe there is something in one stat that we rarely use from 17 lands, and I think we underuse it severely, and that is game duration. And can we look at the duration of the game? How many turns does a game last on average? And can we use it to sort of try to figure out what is the deck's plan just by looking at pure numbers without looking at the deck and without, like assessing it on some kind of willy-nilly criteria? So that's the stat I'm going to focus on today. Um, and that's the average game length, but I did some manipulation of that data, and I looked at a bunch of different metrics in there, but I'm going to summarize a particular aspect of it. So we can have different scenarios of cards, and I'm going to look at delta game length, which is basically the difference between the game length when you draw a card and win, and draw a card and lose. So the idea is that if a card, when drawn, shortens the game when you win, so the games that you lose are going to last longer. The games that you the games that you win are shorter. That will probably either a good aggro card, because good aggro cards, you drop them, you attack the opponent, you reduce their life total, and you win. And even if you don't win, then the opponent cannot like fully commit because they're probably at low life total. So those games will be slightly longer because they cannot like attack you recklessly. So yeah, this is the double effect of if the opponent stumbles, you're gonna kill them very quickly. If the opponent comes back, they won't be able to come back very quickly because you already did a large chunk of damage. Second of all, the cards that can do that will be good finishers in mid-range and controls, because you play your mid-range game, it will last 11 turns, but you drew something like a Boseju and it speeds up the finishing of the game because it's just too big. Opponent might concede, opponent might not have a way of dealing it, or it can just eat them in like 2-3 attacks. And third category will be bombs, because bombs are just good and people will concede on the spot sometimes. So they will shorten the duration of the games. Or they will just completely snowball and take over the game, and it will just end quickly because you get so much value out of it. So I think that these are the three examples I gave. You probably can imagine some other examples of cards that will shorten the length of the games you win and or increase the time of the games that you lost. So the other scenario is the cards that when they are drawn, they increase the game length of won games. So the games that you will win them, but it will take longer. Or if you draw them and you lose, you basically lose faster. The other category will be probably bad cards, which hopefully we don't have to focus on. But the ones that can prolong the game length of won games and you still win, there will be the cards that are stabilizers. So for example, like chunky, cheap defender creatures that you probably put in your deck because you want to go to this end game. So you're going to prolong the duration of the game, but you give yourself time because time is what you're missing in your deck. So you want to go to turn 15, you want to go to turn 17. Other example would be engines, which sort of lock the opponent or slowly accrue value, which lets you to stay longer in the game because you draw answers to their threats. Because especially when they're card drawing engines, you will draw more answers, and you will be able to survive games that you normally don't survive because you run out of steam as a control deck. And like a particular category of this, which is sort of like the ultimate stabilizer, but they will be sweepers, because if you sweep the board, the opponent has to rebuild from scratch. Maybe they will win, but it will take some time, and maybe they won't, and that gives you like several turns probably to stabilize again and win the game. But it will prolong the game length if you win, basically. Um, and there will be cards that, when drawn, they don't change the game length of won games on average. And this is the important part of it, because I can imagine that there are cards that in some games they accelerate how long does the game take, and in some games they let you live for longer when you win the game. So these are the sort of pivotal cards that can be used aggressively or can be used defensively, depending on the situation. So these will be the cards that you're sort of like, ideal for a mid-range deck because they can play this dual role with being the beatdown and being the defensive card. So hopefully we can sort of look at this data and figure out which cards are there. So first of all, I took all the cards from the set and I calculated exactly this thing. How does a card change the game length um, based on the duration of the games when you had the card in hand and you won, and the duration of the games when you had the card in hand and you lost. Should it be opposite? So basically, I know it's correct. So basically, this means I'm pointing to the data for Kumano Faces Kakazan, which games that you won with it are shorter by 1.3 turns than the games that you lost. And this is the card that has the biggest number in terms of the shortening of the duration of the game that you win. Also has a quite high win rate, which is something that is important. Now, Kumano Faces Kakazan is the saga for 1 mana. It pinks for 1 on the first chapter. Second chapter, next creature you play gets a +1/+1 counter this turn. And third, it transforms into a 2/2 haste creature, and it also sort of hoses graveyard of the opponent, because creatures, if something died from damage that your source you control dealt, it will be exiled rather than go to the graveyard. The perfect aggressive card, which confirms my sort of hypothesis that this measure would be good to show the aggressive cards. And when we look at the rest of the cards, there's plenty of ultra aggressive cards in there. So what we have is Kumano Faces Kakazan, shortens the game by 1.3 turn. Thundering Raiju, which is both a bomb and a very good aggressive card, the 3/3 haste that puts a counter when attacks on something and then pings for the number of modified creatures you control except for itself. That also shortens the game by 1.1 turns. Life of Toshiro Umezawa, which is a good aggressive card if you need it to be aggressive, because it can either pump your team, your creature, or it can remove an annoying blocker or make blocks unfavorable. So lots of ways that it can do. Silver Fur Master, another card that, when played early, can change the combat maths and make your attacks faster in terms of diminishing your opponent's life total. We have Okiba Reckoner Raid, the 1 black mana saga. The cost is black, and that drains for 2 over the first 2 chapters, and then turns into a 2/2 menace. That shortens the game by 1 turn. Teachings of the Kirin is a card that someone is asking. This also reduces the length of the game by 1. That's basically a saga that makes for 2 mana you get 2 2/2s. So you go both wide and you boost your team. And when it goes unopposed, it also snowballs quite quickly. So it's a sort of like a really strong aggro card that can be also in grindy decks that control, especially like it could be like a very good pivotal card for the mid-range deck for as well, because you can sort of have those explosive starts with it when it goes unopposed because opponent kept a very slow hand, or it can be this grindy engine that will also help you win in the late game because it makes a couple of your creatures bigger. What else do we have from aggressive cards? Sokazan Smelter, Patchwork Automaton, Iron Apprentice. These are all staples of the aggressive decks. There is Kami of Transience and Generous Visitors, the power horses of green aggressive decks, because if you have those two, you can have super explosive starts. Then you have Voltage Surge, the red mana removal that deals 2 or 4 if you sacrifice an artifact. And this is again a card that lets you push damage through. I would refer you to the Jordan episode of the Draft Lab. Card that sort of surprised me is the Twin Shot Sniper, because that's a 4-drop, but I guess that it's a 4-drop that paves the way for your attacks. It can also be used as for the channel cost as a 2 mana removal. Tawashi Song Shaper, Another aggressive card in the artifact deck, Mukatai Soul Ripper, aggressive card in potentially black red artifacts, Rabbit Battery, Kodama of the West Tree, another sort of card that can be used very well in those green enchantment based aggro decks with Kami of Transience and Generous Visitor, and Glowing Torment, which is removal but not removal, but lets you raise very efficiently and removes the blocker, so it paves the way for your attackers to do their damage. You don't care that the creature stays on board if you are focused strictly on killing the opponent, and they are all speeding up the game by sort of between 1 and zero point 0.8 turns per game. Um, so Jason says, I would expect basically all good red cards that add to the board or to have negative game length delta. Yes, and this is going to be a very strong theme of the data that we're looking at today. And then Pipe Poker said, I'm amazed Michiko is not on the list. Honestly, I was also amazed, but it's not on the list. So I was supposed to check where it was. Probably it's not far off the top 20 cards, but not there. And probably because it's a sort of like a top end finish for the deck, you want to put some things on the board already. And yeah, maybe not always you will manage. So maybe it will be like sort of mid-range aggressive card. Maybe it will like decrease by 0.6 or 0.5 the duration of the game when you play it. Before the one between the ones that you win or you lose. And it also may be that in some situations it's just very bad when you draw it and then you actually lose quicker, which shortens the time of the games that you lost. And there's one more card I didn't mention, Jugan Defends the Temple. That's like two cards actually. Jugan Defends the Temple and Fable of Mirror Breaker. These are the two snowbally bombs that will probably shorten the games just because they are such powerful bombs. Finest Darjeeling says, I guess white just doesn't lend itself to be aggressive in this format. Yes, very well observed, and we will see that in a couple of slides in more detail. Okay, so here, don't focus on that list too much, but I'm showing the cards that are perfectly in the middle of not changing. I just picked them because I thought, okay, it would be nice to show some examples of cards that don't change the length of the game. And we have, for example, Seven Tail Mentor, which is sort of good defensively, good aggressively, good pivotal card. Undercity Scrounger doesn't make you kill opponent faster, but let also you don't lose faster, so it sort of like stays in the middle. Intercessor's Arrest, this sort of removal that is in the color that does not promote aggression, so it can help sometimes maybe when the situation is ripe for that, and sometimes not. It's that when we were young, also I think a card that can be really backbreaking in terms of being aggressive, but also can be a very good stabilizer when you want. Blossom Prancer, another card. You see, there are two modes on the Blossom Prancer, and I think that the numbers confirm that you should be able to use both of them depending on the need. Sometimes you want to draw more gas and finish the game quicker because you drew more gas, and sometimes you want to play it gain for life and hopefully prolong the game until your other value hits the table and you can take over and win. What else do we have? There are a bunch of lands, Commune with Spirits in there, but these cards you sort of can imagine that they are not aggressive, but they are not exactly the most defensive ones as well. Like Intercessor's Arrest is maybe like the most control. Like God, my wife grows plants, but plants bring those gnats that are everywhere. Um, So yeah, Intercessor Arrest is maybe discarded, but it's a fake stabilization because you can always put it on a creature. Opponent has an enchantment removal, and all of a sudden you have a problem. So maybe that's why the card is sort of like not changing the length of the game either way that well. And you have to keep in mind that this data is assigned to Seven Tail Mentor, but of course only part of this data is strictly Seven Tail Mentor. The rest is the context of the Seven Tail Mentor, which decks is it going to be in. So there's plenty of weight assigned to the which cards are going to be played together with Seven Tail Mentors, because it's based on the other cards that whether you win or lose is going to depend. If you draw Seven Tail Mentor and 16 lands, you're going to lose this game independently of playing it. So yeah, you have to keep in mind that this data is heavily tainted with the general characteristics of each color or color combinations that it's played in. So it's worth to keep that in mind. And we're going to look at different color combinations and where do they end up on the mid-range aggro controls kind of spectrum. La 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 la. Yeah, let's skip this one because yeah, these are just the middle of the whole bunch. So that's something to look at. Oh, what happened? No, okay. Ah, something is getting stuck with my presentation. Okay, let's go on. These are the cards that actually prolong the games the most in terms of difference between winning and losing. So Brilliant Restoration will, on average, make the games you win by one turn longer than games that you don't. And I think that in this case, it's sometimes you draw it, you can't play it, you're gonna lose quicker, and if you play it, you're gonna win quite fast because hopefully your deck is designed to be able to play this card. So it's a sort of like all or nothing kind of addition to your deck. But this is the biggest change in terms of game length. And another card that we have is Kamigawa. I think it might be very much the same. In lots of games, you will not be able to play it because of the color requirements, but when you play it, you're going to be very heavily favored. That's the reason why we see this card so high. Another card, Rato Sentinel. That's the 3-mana 3/3 defender that can shuffle something at the bottom of your, or put something at the bottom of your library for some mana, I think. Oh, it also mills on the entrance. I think, it's a defender creature, so obviously it's sort of designed to prolong the game. Then we have a couple of cards that are probably just played very rarely, so I'm not going to draw any attention to it. We have Network Terminal, and this card is a great card in my opinion in terms of playing a slower deck, controlish deck, because at some stage it will ramp you to your bigger defending creatures so that you can stabilize better. And at some stage of the game, when you have enough mana and when you can do whatever you want, it will become an engine of drawing extra card each turn because you will discard the redundant lands to draw gas. So I think that this is how this card prolongs the games. Shigeki, Jukai Visionary. This card allows you to grind through your graveyard, and just next to it says Season of Renewal, and just next to it Tameshi Reality Architect, and just next to it Spirit Sister Call. All four cards that involve a graveyard recursion of some sort. So basically, they let you survive for longer and you win because you get the gas from the graveyard and your opponent is being basically attrition to death by you sort of ramping, boosting, getting cards back from your graveyard and killing them like that. Then we have also Jintaxias, which is similar engine but slightly different. There you don't get anything back, but next things that you play, you're going to get double of. And also your opponent will have difficulty of playing some threats, and some decks will have like almost no way of dealing with it because they have like a bunch of artifacts. They can maybe play one spell per 2 turn, wasting 2 cards to play that spell. They cannot kill it because maybe their removal doesn't align with it. And sometimes the card is just going to be rubbish because you play it and they have an enchantment removal and that's it. Another card, Tawashi Guidebot, the 2/1 that puts a counter on something when it ETBs, and then you can pay 4 minus number of modified creatures you control, so usually 3, possibly 2, 1, to draw a card. It requires tapping. But this card will be a card drawing engine that will prolong the game because you draw more gas and you get more responses. Hey, Hanagram, thank you very much for the raid. We're just talking about how to measure whether something is mid-range, aggro, or control using the data, and we actually started talking about difference in the game length between the games you win with a particular card and the games that you lose when you have a particular card. Um, Basically, some cards make you win much faster than you lose, and these I defined as sort of aggro cards. So we have examples like Kumano faces Kakazan, which is the Red Saga. That's a great aggressive card. Okiba Reckoner Raid, all the package of the Iron Apprentices, Patchwork Automatons for the artifact decks, Kami of Transience, Generous Visitor, and Kodama of the West Tree for the sort of green version of the aggressive deck. And now we're looking at the cards that make the game last longer, so they are sort of control cards, and that will be things like Network Terminal, all the recursion, so the Tamashi, Spirit Sister Call, Season of Renewal, and that's where we got to Tawashi Guidebot, which allows you to draw extra cards, which again in a control deck will let you survive, because you will find your answers even if your opponent is 2-for-1ing you quite a lot. And we have things like, again, Spinning Wheel Kick. This is, again, a card that you want to survive long because you want to spend 6 to 8 mana for it and kill 3-4 creatures, 2-3 creatures with it, and then you're very much favored, but it will take a whole turn, and you're still going to be probably at the edge of death, so you will need some extra time to finalize the win, but you're going to put yourself in a super good situation. And yeah, there's a couple of draw cards like Mnemonic Sphere, for example. This is also something that didn't align very well with the red-blue deck, which wants to be aggressive, and the Mnemonic Sphere is the sort of card that is the opposite of being aggressive. So probably a decent card if you are playing white-blue based on those numbers, because as we will see in a second, white-blue is probably the most controlling archetype that we have in the format. And for some reason oh. But this was only talking about individual cards, and as I said, those individual cards are heavily burdened by what's inside of the deck, but one card doesn't make a deck. You can say, okay, yes, Kumano faces Kakazan is an aggressive card. I knew it without having to have a number for that. But you didn't know if a deck that Kumano faces Kakazan is actually super aggressive, or maybe it's just a mid-range deck and the card is not going to perform super well in it because it just doesn't fit with the plan. So how can we calculate it? So what I did is I calculated the sum of cards values for each and every deck that I had in my collection, and I looked at 78,000 decks from the 17 lands data set. And basically, very low values are aggro decks, and very high values are control decks, because as I showed in the previous slides, aggressive cards make games shorter, controlling cards prolong the games, especially when you win them. And still we get this freezing problem for some reason. I know why. I know the reason. The reason is this graph, because I shouldn't have put it in here. But this is the graph of the 78,000 decks that were there, and their sum of all those changes in game length. So you have some decks that have cards that in total make the game 20 turns shorter. Obviously, that's not going to be possible because you can't make a game 20 turns shorter. But I mean, the point is that those decks have a bunch of cards that make the game shorter, so they have a consistent plan of I'm ultra aggro. And then somewhere in the middle here, which is still below 0 because good cards are still reducing the length of the game, this will be our mid-range decks, and somewhere here we have the ultra control decks that basically really want to prolong the games. And okay, so let's look at the percentages of decks that are in each decile of those aggressiveness scale. So I divided those this graph in basically 10 equal parts. So if there's 80,000, around 8,000 decks will be form a decile. So like this part is the 10% of the most aggressive decks in the format. This part is the second 10%, and blah 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 blah. We go to the end, and this bunch is the 10% more controlling decks. And aggressive decks are on top. Control decks are on the bottom. So you can see that, and these columns sum to 100%. So basically what we can see from white-blue is that there is no white-blue decks in the top 30% of the most aggressive archetypes. And then we see like maybe 3% of them in the fourth decile and fifth decile. So almost all decks that are white-blue are in the bottom half of the of this measure that I introduced, of the how do the cards change the length of the game. And actually 30% of them are in this last 10% of the most controlling decks. When we look at white-black, we have a different picture. So white-black decks are very much mid-range. So most of them, like probably good 90%, are somewhere between the 20% up most aggressive and 20% most controlling. So somewhere between them. There is neither very aggressive decks in them, but there is neither very controlling decks in them. So they're like a perfect example of bang in the middle mid-range. Then we see white-red, which sort of tries to be aggressive. It doesn't quite get there because there is only 9% of the white-red decks that are truly aggressive, but 40% of them are in this 10 to 20% most aggressive and 20 to 30% more most aggressive. And there is no decks that want to prolong the game in white-red. So this might be a partial reason why the archetype did not work very well, because attack with one creature mechanic, that is the signpost mechanic for the deck, sort of wanted to play maybe longer, but the cards just don't allow you to play longer because you just run out of steam in most cases, and that's why you don't get those cards that will prolong the game sufficiently for you to have that strategy matter. So you end up with the sort of deck that wants to be aggressive but does not exactly have tools to be super aggressive. So that's the problem, I guess. Now white-green, almost no decks that are ultra aggressive, because it probably has so many good cards that will prolong how long the game lasts. Even though we did see that there are particular cards that can shorten the game substantially, like Kami of Transience and Generous Visitor and Kodama of the West Tree are among the top 20 cards in the format in terms of making the games shorter, but possibly they just don't align very well with the rest. So you still want to play this game that has a long game plan, and maybe the aggressive cards I mentioned will be essential to make this mid-range strategy work in there, so that you will have those explosive starts where you can actually win. But you want to play your game maybe slightly slower and maybe less headless, and you might want to put some tools to restart if you run out of steam, unlike the decks that are completely dedicated to being aggressive. And then we have Ninjas, which is a tempo deck, which is sort of fast, but sort of very much like White-Red. But we know that White-Red is pretty low win rate, while Blue-Black is decent win rate. So we can assume that Blue-Black can escape with this like middle speed, so like fast deck but not super fast deck, because it has tools, it has some card draw, it has some shenanigans with ninjutsu that it can employ. It can actually punish controlling deck with the virus beetles and bouncing them a couple of the times. So basically Blue-Black is a more successful version of this not full on aggro. And Blue-Red is slightly faster, but very much similar to Blue-Black. So it can have those very aggressive openings, but it's not as fast as the most aggressive deck, which we'll get to in a second. Blue-Green, it's very much similar picture to Blue-White and Blue and Green-White. So basically, we can see the band colors have the similar plan. And it's basically, I want to play the long game. I want to materialize on those super good value cards in my decks. Um, and then we have black red, and here we have like the proper numbers. Black red are 70% of the decks are in the top 10% aggressive. Like basically, if you look at the most aggressive, according to my metric, decks in the format, almost all of them are black red. It's amazing in terms of how dominant this color pair is when you want to build aggressive decks. And I only looked at the two color decks. I'm pretty sure that mono red is even more aggressively tinted. So that's basically gives you the answer what you want to do when you play black red. You want to have those explosive openings. You want to aim at ending the game fast, and Onicult Anvil, which is a good grindy tool, should not be used as a sort of like, I want to game last longer and outgrind opponent with this Onicult Anvil. It should be more like something that I go headlong, I attack for as much as I can, I finish them to those 3-4 life, and then I can do a couple of last pings with the Onicult Anvil, and that should be rather the plan than to try to be more mid range, because what it shows is that most decks in black red that are very aggressive, and we're going to look at the win rates of those deciles in a second, and then you will see why it's important to tint them like this. Then we have black green, and black green is broad in terms of what roles it can play, which might be a part of its success. There are some quite aggressive black green decks, so there can be some aggressive black green decks. There can be some very controlling black green decks. It has I think, the widest range together with the white black, but most of them are sort of mid range in terms of the aggression. So basically occupying this 50th percentile and maybe from 30 to 70 or something, that where you find most of the decks. And red green has sort of similar profile to white red and blue red. It sort of wants to be aggressive, but doesn't quite get there in terms of cards. But there can be some very aggressive red green decks that shorten the game duration. Right. We've seen where each color pair positions itself on this aggro mid-range control spectrum. And just to recap for the podcast listeners, band colors, so blue white, green white, and blue green, they are definitely trying to prolong the game. White black and black green are the ones that want to be mid range, or are naturally are mid range. And then white red, blue black, blue red, and red green are sort of aggro, and black red is definitely very aggressive. So so that's the color characteristic based on numbers, not based on some arbitrary opinion of mine. So I looked at the win rate of each bracket, and general point is that decks that shorten the game the most have the highest win rate, and that is for every color combination. We see drops of win rate as we go towards this control range. Of course, the problem with that is that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, basically, lots of very good cards will shorten the game. Bombs will shorten the game. So basically, decks that have a slightly bigger decrease of the duration of the game will be the ones that are chock full of bombs, and that's the problem that we see. But what we see in decks that do play more controlling, the band colors, the drop is quite small. Like the white blue, if it's in the fourth decile, it has 63% win rate. If it's in the last decile, so the most controlling deck, 53. White green drops from 61% to 55%, and blue green drops from 59.60 to 54. So there are drops there, but the drops are not like insane. Blue black dropped from 68% for the super aggressive blue black builds to 47% in the most controlling blue black builds. And yeah, they cover also the wider range. And black red drops from 59% when you have super aggressive black red decks to 41% when you are in sort of mid range. So the mid range black red decks are just having bad cards because all the good black red cards are aggressive. So you want to chuck as many of them as you can. And it's the same, like red green drops from 58 to 44 and across the gradient. And only ultra aggressive in terms of shortening the game, red green decks are having a good win rate, and probably that's why red green has such a low win rate, because most people don't get to this most aggressive range of the decks, and they build something like this, which has a pretty low win rate. Oh, so arena's down. Well, I'm good that I'm not playing. Um, the chat told me that arena is down, and white red has a very similar profile as red green. So basically, we see a drop off in terms of win rate, similar to the red green from 58 to 47%. And that's again probably the problem of the deck. Most decks are somewhere here, and this is where the win rate is the lowest, while it's hard to build a very successful white red deck. Um, 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 um. And black green is also quite stable on the broad range of game speed impacts. But the super controlling black green decks don't seem to be particularly good, and the super aggressive are just not there's not enough for them to for me to have a number value for them. So yeah, that's how it looks in terms of the aggro mid range control spectrum. As I said, this analysis is something that, well, I started, well, yesterday evening probably, because I was inspired by one of the Sam Black uh, Twitter threads, and I think that the metric is relatively good. There is one problem, and it's actually exposed here in those graphs, that I can't really fish out the good quality cards that shorten the games because they are bombs. And if I manage to do that and focus on only the aggro, mid-range, and control part, and can eliminate those data contaminations that I get from good cards just being very good and shortening the games, I might get to something better. But yeah, I definitely want to hear some of your opinions uh, after the seminar, in terms of what did you think was useful there, what do you think might be a problem according to you, because I'm not the alpha and omega of data analysis, and there's always good ideas that I will be very happy to steal and incorporate into my content. I wonder how much of an effect there is for opponent isn't immediately dead to grindy bomb but concedes because they can't win. I think that there is part of that effect. I've seen that before when I looked in previous formats at the data for replays, because then I can see that opponent concedes because the bomb hits the table. But unfortunately, we don't have the replay data for this one. So I can't really quantify it. But there's definitely that. And there is a big effect of also on non-games. When you have super aggressive opening, opponent will just like, well, I guess I'm dead because I kept the hand with the 4-drop as my first interaction. Baxter is asking, "Hi, I'm new to the stream. What's going on?" I'm basically talking about the data analysis in from 17 lands in relation to, or are you new to this stream in general or new to this stream? Okay, this chart is basically looking at decks from the most aggressive, which is the top row bet player, to the most controlling, and it gives the win rate. And before that, we had a slide that showed which color pairs are the most focus on most aggressive decks and which focus on most controlling and mid range. So basically, this column shows what percentage of white blue decks fall in where on the spectrum of from aggro through mid range to control, and this table shows what is the win rate of the aggressive decks versus mid range and control. Okay, if you're an actuarial analyst, then I'm pretty sure that the entry level for you is quite trivial. So I would recommend rewatching a couple of other episodes if you are interested in the data and limited. I basically only talk about limited data based on 17 lands and try to figure out how we can improve our gameplay by looking at the data and it varies from trivial things like looking at the different win rates and trying to figure out to looking at how we can use data to read signals in draft and where the optimum for signal reading. I looked at things like how does the smoothing algorithm work in best of one. What else did I look? Mulligan impacts. So basically anything that can be analyzed with the data in a hopefully intuitive way. I try to have something to say about it, or like how does the format evolve over time. So this episode is basically how we can try to use numbers to assess if the deck is aggro, mid-range, and control, which hopefully over time will lead to some kind of way of figuring out which card would fit better in my deck based on the plan that the data shows I'm having, basically. Oh, thank you, Pipe Poker, for saying that the previous analysis were boring. Just joking. Okay, so we looked at those win rates, but I actually went and fished out some decks, and I was very random in fishing them. I basically I didn't look at the deck and I said, "Oh, that would be a good example." I picked the first deck that I could find that was a trophy deck in the top decile, in the mid decile, and in the bottom decile. So and then I just visualize it using sealeddeck.tech, a tool that I recommend to everyone that wants to play around with the deck building or sealed pool buildings. It's great. I'm not getting paid for that. It's just great. And the guys are super kind and they figure out ways on how to make it more user friendly and things like that. So I highly recommend supporting them. So this is the first aggro, ultra aggro black red deck that I fished out from the data pool. And as you can see, like 2 Cloring Torment, 2 Okiba Reckoner Raids, Kumano Faces Kakazan, Rabbit Battery, Simian Sling, 2 Voltage Surges, 2 Iron Apprentice, Lethal Exploit, Kami's Flare, so like lots of cheap removal. Sulkazan Smelter, which lets you overextend slightly with um, um, uh, basically overextend with the artifacts that are not useful anymore. Uh, 2 Tawashi Song Shapers, High Speed Hover Bike, Ambitious Assault, which is I think that probably the best home for it because here it's literally a finisher. Seismic Wave, 2 Ambushers, Mukotai Ambushers, the 3 2 Ninjutsu Life Linkers for racing purposes, and then 1 bomb in Thundering Raiju, which is actually a perfectly aligned bomb, and Flame Discharge as a removal that you can also be quite useful because you will often have a modified creature of some sort. So this is an example of an ultra aggressive decks, and I hopefully I love that build. I mean, I picked it at random. I put it in sealed deck.tech and I looked at it and say, wow, I wish I could play something like that. Look at it, it's just gorgeous. Even the bomb is like super perfectly aligning with the plan of that deck. So this was the most aggressive on my scale of aggressive decks, and it does look like it, which made me super excited in the fact that this method is not completely useless for assessing aggressiveness, mid range, and control scale. So then I moved to the middle and I picked I looked at what is the median of my numbers. So basically, uh, if we have this, I'm pointing like with my finger to the screen like an idiot. But if we have this range for the most aggressive decks to the most controlling decks, I went bang in the middle somewhere here, and I just like went down a bit to find the first trophy deck from that middle range, and lo and behold, it's a sort of black green with minor splash. And we have generous visitor, which can be aggressive, can be defensive. We have defensive bamboo grove archer, a couple of coiling stalkers, which are quite aggressive. Kappa tech wrecker, which can be anything you want it to be. Kami of transience, which is, as we learned, aggressive, but it also probably can play defense quite well. Tatsunari, which is aggressive. Undercity Scrounger, which is very defensive. Bearer of Memory, which is late game engine card, so I guess you want to prolong the game for that particular purpose. We have Season of Renewal. We learned that this is a very controlling card, and Gloom Shrieker, which probably is also there on the controlling spectrum, and Kami of Restless Shadows for rebuying some things. So yeah, you see, there's a mixture. There is some aggro, there is some defensive play, and I'm pretty sure that this deck was piloted very well. Also has a very good mana base, which does help those decks by quite a lot. But yeah, it's basically black green ninjas with capability of going long and capability of finishing the game quite quickly, with capability of attrition, with capability of going wide and maybe going tall with the things like Roaring Earth and the Generous Visitor and the Kami of Transience. So yeah, quite a lot going on in here. As I said, I picked those decks without the bias, so this was the first that I stumbled upon, and that's how it looks. And then we have a control deck, and this is the most controlly deck that had a trophy and that I found in the list. It has a bunch of 2 drops, but look at those 2 drops. We have Reality Chip, great early blocker. Ghost Shintai of Lost Windows, great early blocker. Azusa of Many Journeys, which is a way of ramping yourself to play the late game things earlier slightly. Bamboo Grove Archer, 2 of them. Things that basically clog the board for some decks and let you survive till the late game. Goshintai of Boundless Vigor. As you see, there is another Goshintai here, and there is another Goshintai here. So we have a sort of shrine subsection of this deck. And if you want to go long, I don't think that there's a big problem of putting Splash of Goshintai, because you will be able to play it at some stage. Okay, then we have Shigeki, which allows you to rebuy things that you lost. Not 1, but 2 seasons of renewal, which again make the game go longer because you can rebuy things and replay them. Melfork, Moonfolk Puzzle Maker, another thing that prolongs the game. And Rato Sentinel, which is another thing that prolongs the game. Boseju, which is like a good roadblock, but can also turn the corner very quickly. Geothermal Kami, which with so many enchantments, it can generate quite some value. But also, for example, if someone plays like a big dragon or something, you can rebuy your Bamboo Grove Archer for the channel purpose, gain free life to build up a cushion. Bounce a cheap enchantment and then basically get 3 life, replay it because it's a late game. You have Mnemonic Sphere, which I told you, this is the card that again is more of a controlling card than an aggro card in artifact decks. So this is a perfect home for it. And then once we move past the Goshintai package and the Boseiju, we have Imperial Oath at the top and Kairi, the Swirling Sky, as a bomb that can finish the game, and the Tales of Master Sashiro as sort of like a big turn the corner creature as well. So this is like really great example of a control deck. I think that the only issue I have with this deck is maybe 3 planes is too much. I would probably play 1 or 2 in this kind of deck, but not for me to judge. But you can see how controlling. Oh yeah, Tawashi Guidebot again, another card that will let you have this engine for drawing cards late in the game, and you have all the tools to survive to that late game when Tawashi Guidebot will become a menacing threat. I mean, the only thing that I really miss here is maybe the network terminal, to basically burn some of those extra lands that you draw and you don't need anymore. Maybe they had self mill. Yeah, that's true because with 2 seasons of renewal, and Goshintai, you can, yeah, you can do it. Very, 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 very well observed, Alex. I did play a couple of those self mill decks, and they can be really good. I played one that was also a shrine build, but it was Sultai and it had Gloom Shrieker, Seasons of Renewal, and the opponent was just milling themselves, and then just continuously rebuying the things that they milled. And I lost pretty badly with the deck that went 7-1. And I didn't have a say in that game, basically. It did work quite well, even though my deck was relatively strong. Um, okay, so these are the example of those different flavors of the decks. As you can see, I mean, it sort of makes sense. The numbers arbitrarily showed us what the deck wants to do, and I think the numbers were right. And they are not perfect yet, and definitely the method will need to be improved. Um, but but at least it's a promising beginning of this analysis, and I'm quite happy with how it worked out, especially looking at those decks that it sort of selected. Right, and that's the end of the main part. But as I promised, I'm going to talk about one card at the end of each episode. I was sort of asked to talk about Roaring Earth, but I didn't have time to do a proper analysis of Roaring Earth, so I'm going to move it for the next week. So instead, I chose the Kamigawa's Worst Kept Secret. And of course, that worst kept secret is Kami of Terrible Secrets. I couldn't afford the pun. I couldn't ignore the pun potential there. But Kami of Terrible Secrets is a 4 mana 3/4 spirit. When it enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact and enchantment, you draw a card and you gain 1 life. So it's sort of something between a vanilla 3/4, which is not great in modern Magic, and slightly better Sarul's Packmate if you skip the part of having Foretell, which was quite a useful package in Sarul's Packmate. But Sarul's Packmate was an all-star. That was the best common in the whole Kaldheim format. So Kami of Terrible Secret being slightly better in the late game than Sarul's Packmate in some situation means that at least we should consider this card. And it has good numbers. It is actually still going quite late. So I just wanted to very briefly look at when is it more of a packmate and when and less of the vanilla free for. So obviously to do so we have to look at how many of each type of card do you have in your deck. And I made it simple for myself and for yourself without putting this big matrix kind of tables. I looked at what is the win rate of Kami of Terrible Secrets in decks with the X amount of the lowest available resource. So if a deck had 7 enchantments and 1 artifact, I used 1 as the limiting factor. If it would have 4 artifacts and 3 enchantments, 3 would be the limiting factor. So basically, the lowest amount of either artifacts and enchantments will be taken into account, and then I can calculate the win rate based on that. And I only took the bins where there was at least 500 instances of a game, because I thought the other ones will be slightly shifty, and there was very few that fell out of the range that I looked at. So without further ado, if we look at it, if you have limiting type, the number is 1. The win rate of Kami is 50%, 50.6%, which is a low win rate. So basically, this tells you that you should not play it when you only have like one artifact or one enchantment in your deck, and you hope maybe that you're gonna, spike it. It's not gonna happen, and the card becomes a 3/4 vanilla way too often. But we see that there is a roughly consistent increase in the win rate depending on the how much of the limiting factor you have. So it goes to 54% when you have two artifacts or enchantments, and this is your limiting factor. Same with 3. And then we go like 55.7 when you have 4, 56.4 when you have 5. So I think that from 5 onwards, you should be quite happy to play a card. So when you play Kami of Terrible Secrets, you should focus on having at least 5 of your most limiting type. And if you watch the previous seminar when we talked about the artifact enchantment spectrum, your limiting type should probably be artifacts in most decks because you want to have more enchantments than artifacts in your deck to make it better. Obviously, you can't choose it, but you should definitely aim at having more enchantments than you have artifacts. But you want to have at least 5. And of course, this is a rudimentary analysis because some artifacts and some enchantments will yeah. So yeah, the graph goes from 5, 6, 7, 8, and even 9. So there were decks, and there were, well, over 500 games played with them that had 9 artifacts, at least 9 artifacts, and at least 9 enchantments. So yeah, quite versatile. And then Kami of Terrible Secrets gets around 60% win rate because it's almost always going to be 4 mana, 3/4, gain 1 life and draw a card, which is like the ultimate stabilizer because 4 toughness is quite a lot in this format. Gaining 1 life, always a nice addition, and you draw a card, just like the card becomes really, really good. But even if the 7 is your limiting type, then you still have around 59% win rate. So, I mean, there's always some variance in there. I think that this is roughly a linear trend. So, I mean, you can draw yourself a trend line, and you will get there. I think that having 10 is almost impossible. I think that there were maybe 2 decks that had it, but they were they were there. Decks with that managed to squeeze in Kami of Terrible Secrets while having 10 enchantments and 10 artifacts already in the deck. So yeah, it was probably just Kami of Terrible Secrets and the things that enable Kami of Terrible Secrets. Now, yeah, this is a very simplistic view because, of course, there will be some, especially, there will be some enchantments and artifacts that are better for supporting Kami of Terrible Secrets. Like, for example, creature enchantments and creature artifacts are a bit easier to disrupt. So you have to be wary of that when you play the card. And straight enchantments and straight artifacts without the creature clause might be better to enable the card because they're harder to remove, so you will be most likely keeping them. That's why sagas are usually good because you can play turn 4 saga, it won't flip to a creature, you have some artifact lying around. You play turn 5 Kami of Terrible Secrets, you draw a card, and then the opponent cannot do anything about it. Okay, well, and that was it. I think that the last slide, we took a bit of a look at the Kami of Terrible Secrets. Hopefully you can see that data confirms that the card is great, but you need to have a deck that is slightly built with it in mind if you want to achieve amazing levels. And 60%, that's more or less the win rate of Sarul's Packmate. So basically with 9 artifacts and enchantments, Kami of Terrible Secrets becomes Sarul's Packmate level card, but you can get it way later than you get Sarul's Packmate. And with that, I would like to thank the people that allow me to do those analyses, and that's the 17lens.com team. Viral Misnomer, Hululu, and Grant Wu are the ones that I usually single out, but there is plenty more people that are either volunteering, helping with the dev, but not necessarily involved in communicating and adminning the website, but they also require more anonymous cheers. I would like to thank Fake Jake Brown for helping me to develop this seminar into a podcast. So if you're not into visuals, or if you don't have much time and you listen to those kind of things during a drive or something, then it's available as a podcast. I'm also going to put this on YouTube if you want to rewatch it later, or much later. Additional thanks today will be to sealeddeck.tech, because that's an awesome site, an awesome tool for streamers and for Magic players, and the team involved in it is also great. And for the ones that listen to this as a podcast, I would also like to thank SSQ and Mana Junkie for the theme song that I'm using for start. And yeah, if you like the content, then please, by all means, do follow, do spread the word, recommend it to your friends that maybe are limited inclined, or they just like data. And yeah, if you have cash burning in your pocket, then I would suggest that first you go to 17lands.com and support them, because they definitely need money. But if you still have any cash burning in your pocket, then you can subscribe to it, to my Twitch stream, and make me outrageously wealthy, and I can buy like brand cereal and things that only rich people do. And with that, I would like to thank you, and I'll see you next week.